Pnawn da. Gawaf Cynulliad Cenedlaethol Cymru Drefn. Item 1, cwestiynau Prif Weinidog. And question 1, Rebecca Evans.
How is the Welsh Government working to improve road safety in Wales?
Well, our road safety framework for Wales sets out the measures that we're taking to improve road safety and, of course, to reduce the number of people killed and seriously injured on Welsh roads.
Thank you, First Minister. Following the very worrying news that Wales has the highest rate of teenage drivers who are injured or killed on the roads, and that the level is particularly high in Dyfed-Powys, how is the Welsh Government working with partners to ensure that young drivers are able to handle cars on rural roads where accidents are most severe and most common?
Well, we have established an all-Wales young driver working group to identify the approaches that are needed to reduce the number of young casualties on Welsh roads. In addition, of course, we provide funding for young people this year for over 2,000 of them to receive Pass Plus Cymru training. It provides additional practical and theoretical training post-driving test to improve skills and driving behaviour, and is a factor when calculating insurance premiums for young people as well. Although, of course, the issue of driving standards is not devolved, nevertheless, we take seriously the issue of ensuring that road safety figures continue to follow the right direction.
Jonathan Saunders.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, recent tragic events in Corwin have reiterated the dangers faced by our motorcyclists on Welsh roads. In 2012, motorcyclists were 70 times more likely to be killed or seriously injured in a crash than a car driver. However, despite the idea of young adults being at most risk since 1998, it is actually those over the age of 30 who are more likely to be casualties, with men making up approximately 90% overall. Could you advise what you are doing in particular as regards educating and looking at ways to prevent the frequent numbers of deaths now that we hear on our roads due to motorcycling accidents?
Well, there are two issues here. First of all, a number of motorcyclists these days are people in middle age and older. They're people on a Sunday. You see them in their kit, expensive kit, and of course the polished, expensive motorbikes. And of course they want to enjoy their motorbikes, but we have noticed that some of the magazines have been saying, come to Wales to, open the throttle. And that means, of course, they're speeding. And no matter how good you are as a motorcyclist, you lose control, you have very little protection, you are at risk. So I think there is an emphasis here on, we're talking about people here who are mature in age to ensure that they ride safely, and also, of course, on the magazines to make sure that they don't promote irresponsible riding.
Alan Fair-Jones.
Gan gyfeirio at yr un broblem ar ddamwen yngheuol ym Mhontyblydyn, un arall ar A47, dim pob un yn ymwneud â beiciau modur. Pa drafodaethau mae'r Llywodraeth wedi gael gyda'r Comisiynwyr heddlu i weld a oes modd cynnal ymgyrch i geisio newid arferion rhai o'r gyrwyr yma?
Wi'n credu bod yna'n rhywbeth call a rhywbeth wrth gwrs sy'n sydd wedi gwneud ymlaen ystyried. Wrth gwrs, mae rhaid ni gofio rhywun sydd wedi cael i lladd yn enwedig yn ddiweddar. Ond mae fe'n bwysig dros ben bod yr heddlu yn ystyried yn waitog. Weithio gyda ni fel Llywodraeth wrth gwrs mwyn sicrhau bod yr ymgyrch yna o ddiogelwch yn un sydd yn sicrhau bod llai o beicwyr yn cael i lladd yn y blynyddoedd nesaf.
Kirsty Williams.
First Minister, one of your targets is to see a 40% reduction in the number of young people killed or seriously injured on our roads by 2020. Could you give us an update as whether you believe that target will be reached? And would you also agree with me, one of the reasons why young people in rural areas are killed in higher proportions is because often there is a lack of public transport alternatives for young people, therefore they have to be driving their cars. And what can we do to improve the opportunities for young people in rural areas to access affordable public transport? Well,
if that were the case, then we'd see an increase in accidents across the age groups, not just for young people. We know that the overall rate of casualties on Welsh roads has been falling. It fell again in 2013. The number of motorcyclists and young persons killed or seriously injured does remain below the 2004-8 average, and indeed there's been a general trend towards fewer people being injured on the roads over the years in any event. So I think the 2020 objective is perfectly reachable, but what's important, of course, is that young people, when they learn to drive, when they pass their test, even though the test now is far more difficult than the test I tried 30 years ago, I have to say, especially the theory end of it, that they do realise that there's still more to do in terms of learning how to drive, learning road sense, and that's what Pass Plus Cymru aims to do, with the added incentive, of course, of providing a potential reduction in what are very hefty insurance premiums.
Question 2, William Graham.
What assessment has the Welsh Government made of the RAC Foundation report on accident rates for young drivers?
Well, I'd refer the member to the answer I've already given. It's an important issue, of course, and the answers I've given in terms of how to encourage young drivers to drive more safely has been encapsulated in the previous answer.
Thank you for your previous answer, which I note, First Minister. You will be aware the report has shown that in Gwent, for example, the rate is more than half as high as the United Kingdom average, giving it the second highest casualty rate of anywhere in the United Kingdom, topped sadly only by Dyfed Powys. The United Kingdom Department of Transport agreed to commission research into how telematics can help change the attitudes and behaviour of learner drivers, undertaking focus groups with parents, young people and employers to get a better understanding of the issue from their perspective. I'm sure you would like to assure the House that you are fully behind measures of this kind. Anything that can be done to reduce the terrible character on our roads must be taken.
Of course, I should add, of course, that £4 million in capital funding and £2 million in revenue funding has been set aside for road safety in this financial year, and we have prioritised schemes and projects that work to reduce casualties in what are still, unfortunately, high-risk groups.
Lindsay Whittle.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, Tredigga Comprehensive School in 2009 produced a powerful video outlining the risks and horrendous consequences of texting whilst driving. The video has now had over 80,000 hits on YouTube. We need to encourage more comprehensive and widespread education of the risks associated with such dangerous driving practices. Do you have any plans to work with local authorities to do this, especially considering, as my good friend Bill Graham has said, Gwent has the second highest rate of accidents amongst young drivers in any part of the UK?
Yes, I mean, we'll work with the police, of course, in order to reduce the number of accidents. I mean, texting while driving is illegal, simple as that. I mean, I can't imagine anything that's, that would fit more into the category of driving without due care and attention at the very least. It's widely appreciated that making a phone call without a hands-free system in the car is illegal. It's clearly the case that more work needs to be done in terms of texting, although it's not clear how many of these accidents texting has actually caused. It's self-evident, in my view, that texting is, by its very nature, dangerous while at the wheel of a car.
We now move to questions from the party leaders. And first this afternoon, we have the Leader of the Opposition, Andrew Archie-Davies.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, are there enough intensive care beds in Wales?
Yes, we believe that there are. And if you look, for example, at the number of beds per head across Wales, that figure is higher than in England.
Regrettably, you'll be aware today of news stories that point to 29 patients dying prematurely because of their inability to access cardiac services at the University Hospital Cardiff or Morrison hospitals. One of the doctors involved, Dr. Paul Morgan, has identified a failure to have enough intensive care beds available here in Wales to address some of the conditions that these patients are presenting. That 29 patients who died prematurely has a 70% increase, in the number of premature deaths over the previous year. You have clinicians saying there are not enough intensive care beds available to meet the demand. This afternoon, we are going to have a statement from you about the programme for government. It is there, 490-odd pages of it. It is clear that clinicians are saying there are not enough intensive care beds here in Wales. Why are you not delivering the goods to meet the demand that they require to address these premature deaths?
Well, it's very difficult to comment on a programme that no one's yet seen. But I note the comments on the website. I also note the comments of Adam Keynes in terms of what he said about what is being done to reduce the number of people who are waiting on cardiac waiting lists. People do, unfortunately, pass away across the UK when they're waiting for cardiac operations. That is of no comfort to those who are their loved ones. I understand that. And occasionally there will be times when people are not able to have that surgery. However, what is clear is that the number of people waiting for cardiac surgery in South Wales has dropped over the last year.
That drop is obviously a contributed factor by you accessing treatment across the border in Bristol and Birmingham, I believe, by commissioning capacity out of the independent sector. We have no ideological problems on this side of the House. So long as the patient can have their treatment free at the point of delivery, we believe that that is a sensible course of action. But as I've said to you in my second question to you, clinicians are saying there are not enough intensive beds available to meet the demand. There has been a 70% increase in the premature deaths because of cardiological problems within these two hospitals. Do you believe that the families of people like Ron Jones deserve an apology from you as First Minister for not putting the resources into the Welsh NHS because they are dying prematurely because their conditions cannot be met?
Well, it's very difficult to comment on an individual's case. What we do know is that the numbers waiting for cardiac operations are dropping. Now, if it were the case that the numbers were increasing, then one might expect to see an increase in the number of people dying. It's not clear where these figures are from. It's not clear how sound they are. Now, I looked at the BBC Wales website, which said that there had been a halving in the numbers of people waiting for cardiac operations since August last year in Cardiff. And then the Swansea figures, which made no sense at all and have also been cut and pasted, said that in March 2013 there were 323 patients waiting for cardiac operations, an increase of 57 since last year. Well, 2013 is last year, so I'm not sure where those figures are from or whether they make any sense at all. There will be occasions when people do unfortunately pass away, when they're waiting for cardiac operations. It happens in England, it happens in Scotland, it happens in Wales. But what we do need to ensure is that the trend towards a reduction in the waiting times and waiting list for cardiac operations continues, and that's exactly what we've done.
We now move to Leader of the Welsh Liberal Democrats, Kirsty Williams.
First Minister, today we've seen very promising early results from new skin cancer drugs, and we can be really proud of the role that Swansea College of Medicine have played in those trials. Could you outline what steps your government is taking to support clinical trials in Wales?
We're very supportive. Melanoma is a disease quite close to my heart. It's the illness that took my mother. And I know it's a disease that's exceptionally difficult to treat once it's impossible to treat effectively once it's spread. So I very much welcome our role in Wales and the work that's been done in terms of providing what appear to be some very good results thus far for 2 drugs for melanoma. And as the Leader of the Liberal Democrats will know, we're very fortunate, for example, in the research facilities we have, particularly in the University Hospital of Wales, that have contributed so much to dealing with an illness that all in this chamber, of course, will be familiar with.
First Minister, we do know that the clinical trial improves the quality of care and the outcomes for many patients, and it encourages and motivates the workforce and can help us retain internationally renowned clinicians within Wales. Will you ensure that the ability to run clinical trials for cancer drugs in Wales will not be jeopardised by clinicians being unable to prescribe treatments regarded as the accepted standard of care? If they can't do that, it can mean they can't take place in a clinical trial.
But if treatments are the accepted standard of care, they'll be NICE approved. And so I wouldn't expect there to be a difficulty in terms of being able to prescribe those drugs. In terms of clinical trials, of course, they are set up in various different ways. For example, for many, many years, UHW has been part of the leukemia trials, more than 20 years, where effectively people arriving at the hospital were immediately part of a trial, certainly 20 years ago. And that has led, of course, to tremendous improvements in the diagnosis and treatment of that illness. But I'm not aware of there being restrictions on the prescription of a particular drug as part of a clinical trial.
Perhaps, First Minister, you would agree to meet with clinicians at Velindre who do have concerns about this. You have taken a very strong stance here in the Chamber about Welsh patients not being prevented from accessing up-to-date cancer treatments. In that case, will you look again at the Welsh NHS decision not to provide Sir Sphere's radiotherapy in Wales, and also at the inability of the Welsh NHS to have commissioned peritoneal metastases cytoreduction surgery, not drugs? These are surgical procedures and radiotherapy techniques that have been accepted as being successful. Will you look again at those decisions so Welsh patients have access to both those technologies?
I think it's best if I ask the Health Minister to write to the Leader of the Liberal Democrats about those particular procedures. As with all cancer treatments, the difficulty is, of course, knowing how effective they will be, because no two people are ever alike in terms of their response to the way drugs or indeed treatment are administered. But I will certainly ask the Health Minister to write with regard to those specific instances so that she can have the answer.
Leader of Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood.
Diolch, Llywydd. Llywydd, both the First Minister and the leader of the Conservatives in Wales both took to the radio this morning to proclaim that economic recovery had taken root. Does the First Minister, in all honesty, believe that people in this country are feeling an economic recovery?
I think there's some way to go yet, but we know there's been a great success in terms of unemployment figures, youth unemployment, jobs growth Wales, the fact that more and more people have the skills that they need, the modern apprenticeships, all these things come together to ensure that we're laying the foundations for a robust economy in the future. Although, of course, we're not in the situation that we were pre-2008.
It's almost as if the First Minister hasn't spoken to people who are seriously struggling in these difficult economic times. The Deputy Governor of the Bank of England a few days ago said this: "Here in Wales, it looks like growth started 6 to 9 months ago, whereas for England, it was more like a year since growth got back to reasonable rates. There's still a bit of element of catch-up here." Does the First Minister agree that growth is lagging behind in Wales? And if he does agree, does he take any responsibility for it?
Well, what the Deputy Governor said was self-evidently wrong. I mean, first of all, you can't compare the whole of England, north-east of England, London, south-east, and say you compare the whole of England with Wales. But even with that comparison, our unemployment rate is lower than it is in England. We have probably the best job creation scheme for young people in the world, I'd argue. I don't see another one that's as successful. We see youth unemployment dropping. We need to make sure, of course, that GVA, I beg your pardon, continues to rise. We've been hugely successful in attracting investment, Pinewood being at the pinnacle of that investment. We have worked very hard to rebuild our presence overseas and also, of course, to make sure that we bring investment into Wales. That is not to say, of course, that the economy is where it was 8 or 9 years ago. That clearly isn't the case. That's true of every country in Western Europe and North America. But nevertheless, given the circumstances that we find ourselves in, for example, to be in a position where unemployment is lower than England is extraordinary. Usually, Wales was always at the tail end of an economic recovery. This time, we're at the front.
Those figures take absolutely no account of the type of jobs that people are in, the number of 0 hours contracts, the low pay and the difficulty people are finding to make ends meet, even to put food on the table. Llywydd, if we are to reverse this historic underperformance of the Welsh economy and improve living standards here, we must take responsibility as a country, and the First Minister must take responsibility as a First Minister too. Now, yesterday, the Scottish Conservatives unveiled proposals for devolution of income tax to Scotland without a lockstep. Now, I know that the First Minister agrees that a lockstep should not apply to Wales. So therefore, will his colleagues in London back Plaid Cymru's renewed bid to remove the lockstep from the Wales bill, or will those MPs be backing the London Tory line?
Isn't it amazing that there are two simple answers to the economy as far as Plaid are concerned? One is tax pop, the other is tax people. The fact you have income tax powers does not mean, unless you explain how you're going to use them, that they will be of any help at all in terms of the economy. Having the power is one thing, using the power is another. And it's incumbent on Plaid Cymru to explain exactly how they would use those powers to the benefit of the economy. They talk about procurement. What I've seen of their procurement ideas are actually unlawful under EU law. But that is a small item that they haven't actually thought of. Now, we are always open to suggestions in terms of how we can upskill our people, how we can ensure that we create more jobs. But to suggest that Wales is in some way doing exceptionally badly is quite simply wrong. Unemployment is a fact. Unemployment, as a fact, is lower than the UK average. That is a fact. We are getting more highly skilled jobs into Wales. Pinewood is an example of that, and there's more interest beyond that as well. These are not rubbish jobs. These are jobs that are sustainable, they are long-term, and they are highly skilled jobs. That's the future direction of the Welsh economy. But to try to pretend that somehow everything is very dark is completely wrong. We take the view that we will talk Wales up. We are happy that the Welsh economy is moving in the right direction. There is more work to be done, but really the fantasies of Plaid Cymru, who say the answer to every issue and problem in the Welsh economy is to get the lockstep removed, shows how out of touch they are.
We now move back to questions on the paper. And question 3 is Darren Miller.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Will the First Minister make a statement on the Welsh Government workforce?
Well, that is a matter for the Permanent Secretary. He has responsibility for that.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. You'll be aware that many people have expressed concerns about the appointments process for the Welsh Government workforce, particularly given news that the former nursing director at the Abertawe Bro Morgannwg University Health Board had been appointed as a project manager on a fundamental standards of care review. This, of course, is the individual who is responsible for the nurses who were at the health board at the time when Professor Andrews deemed there to have been serious failings in patient care at 2 hospitals within that health board area. We know that 13 nurses have now been suspended as a result of the inquiry into the allegations surrounding the falsification of patient records. How can you be assured, as First Minister, that appropriate people are appointed to very important roles in terms of our NHS so that people are not let down by the appointment system through the appointment of individuals like this person? And can you tell us whether you have confidence that this person can fulfil the role which she has been given?
Yes, I do, and I draw on what the report prepared by Professor Andrews actually said, namely that no one individual or group of individuals should be the subject of a witch hunt. It was quite clear from the report itself that she felt that the board certainly was able to take forward the proposals that suggestions that she took forward. The individual that the members mentioned was part of that team. She has now moved on, but there's no reason to suggest that in some way she is not capable of undertaking the job that she has taken on. The reality is that the report itself made it quite clear that there should not be a vendetta against the staff, and he is pursuing that vendetta now in the chamber.
Bethan Jenkins.
Prif Weinidog, nes I ofyn I bobl ar-lein y bore yma pa mater oedd yn fwyaf pwysig iddyn nhw ynglyn â swyddi trwy Llywodraeth Cymru ac hefyd trwy asanteithau mae Llywodraeth Cymru yn ei sponsro. Ac eto, y prif pwynt o bwys I bobl yw contractau 0 awr ac hefyd contractau lle bod pobl ar cyflogau mor is fel nad ydyn nhw'n cael yr un fath o amddiffyniad a phobl eraill, enghraifft y pobl hynny sydd yn gweithio yn amgueddfa Cenedlaethol Cymru sydd yn gwynebu colli eu cyflogau premium am weithio ar penwythnosau. Beth ydych chi fel Gweinidog, fel Prif Weinidog, yn mynd I gallu gwneud I sicrhau bod pobl ar draws Cymru sydd yn gweithio ar rhan asiantaethau sydd yn cael eu sponsro gan Llywodraeth Cymru yn cael rhygredydd maen nhw'n heiddi ar gyfer eu swyddi?
Wel, byddwn ni bob corff I ystyried faint o bobl sydd os mae bobl gyda nhw sydd mewn sefyllfa lle mae gyda nhw cytundeb 0 awr. Does neb yn gweithio I Lywodraeth Cymru sydd ar gytundeb 0 awr, a ni wedi edrych ar hwn. Ac wrth gwrs mae rhaid cael deddfwriaeth ar y lefel Deyrnas Unedig mwyn sicrhau bod hwn ddim yn digwydd ar y lefel hynny hefyd. So felly, does ddim waniaeth ynglyn ar y gwyddo rhwng fyna ar aelod I hunan, ond mae rhaid ni sicrhau wrth gwrs bod ffordd Cymreig a Phrydeinig I ddelio gyda hwn.
Question 4, Mark Isherwood.
Will the First Minister outline the Welsh Government policies to improve public health in Wales?
They are to be contained in various documents, but particularly, of course, the Public Health White Paper, which was published on the 2nd of April.
Thank you. Well, since the 1990s, the British Medical Association have been saying that health impact assessments should be put on a statutory basis. The Green Paper on the Public Health Bill referred to health impact assessments and said that, or proposed that Health Board should actually have an early sight of planning applications accordingly, but there's no reference to health impact assessments in the White Paper. Why is that?
Well, the issue which he refers to is a planning issue. I would argue any kind of impact, whether it's environmental impact, whether it's a health impact, are more properly contained within the planning system and indeed within planning guidance, and that will be the area, of course, where consideration will be given to matters such as that.
Elin Jones.
Prif Weinidog, un o gyfrifoldebau mwyaf Llywodraeth yw I warchod iechyd plant. Mae gyda chi'r pwerau I wahardd smygu mewn ceir, lle mae plant yn bresennol. A ydych chi yn hyderus y fod na ddigon o amser I chi fel Llywodraeth I ddeddfu I wahardd smygu mewn ceir gyda plant os yw'r dystiolaeth ych chi'n edrych arno ar hyn o bryd yn cefnogi gwneud hynny, ac os ydych chi yn dangos yr ewyllus I wneud yr gwaharddiad yna?
Ydyn, os yna beth mae'r tystiolaeth yn dangos, dwi ddim yn gweld bod yna broblem mawr ynglyn ag ystyried ystyried hwn yn y dyfodol wrth gofio wrth gwrs beth yw barn fy marn i mwyafrif yr aelodau yn y siambr hyn ynglyn â'r mater hwn.
Aled Roberts.
Diolch Llywydd. Prif Weinidog, mae nifer yn credu bod yna gyfle wedi cholli rhyw 5 mlynedd yn ôl pan ddari iechyd cyhoeddus aros o fewn y gwasanaeth iechyd. Ydych chi'n credu wrth yr holl trafodaeth ynglyn â Comisiwn Williams, ddyle edrych os oes yna fodd i ni ailstrwythuro a symud iechyd cyhoeddus yn ôl i fewn i Lywodraeth leol?
Wel, mae hwnna wedi cael ei godi wrth gwrs, so byddai rhaid ni i fod yn ofalus iawn i sicrhau bod Llywodraeth leol yn gallu delio gyda iechyd cyhoeddus. Bydd yn ffili ar hyn o bryd yma marn ni. So mae rhaid sicrhau bod y strwythyr yna i ddechrau, a wedyn ni ystyried pa bwere gallu cael ei roi i Lywodraeth leol. A wedi gweud sawl gwaith gyda chyrff sydd yn fwy, felly mynd deg i ystyried faint o bwere, mwy o bwere, dylai nhw gael yn dyfodol. Mae hwn yn un peth all gallu cael i ystyried unwaith mae'r ail strwythwr yna wedi digwydd.
Question 5.
Thank you, Llywyd. What is the Welsh Government doing to protect and enhance biodiversity in Wales?
We are developing a nature recovery plan which defines the actions needed to halt and reverse the decline of biodiversity, and of course the Environment Bill will ensure that we have the legislative framework to manage our resources in an integrated way.
Thank you for that, First Minister. Over the last 3 years, as a member of the Environment and Sustainability Committee, we visited a large number of really impressive projects which both protect and enhance biodiversity across Wales, whilst also enhancing food production, energy production and flood protection by way of an example. First Minister, can you assure me that the suite of bills that we have forthcoming over the next 2 years of this Assembly will protect those initiatives, allow us to have more of them, and in particular develop a system for paying people who provide those sorts of eco-services to the people of Wales?
Yes, I mean, it's bringing together what already exists to an extent. I mean, there are, for example, the Tir Gofal scheme, farmers are incentivised to ensure that they're able to provide environmental resources, and that will be the case in the future. Because we know that Pillar 1 payments will decline in the future. Pillar 2 payments are likely to have more emphasis, and that means farmers are going to be in a position where they're going to be paid to do things, particularly with regard to the environment. So it started off some 10 years ago. The issue then, of course, is how do we ensure, for example, that flooding continues to be dealt with, and we have invested heavily in flood protection schemes. And we see, of course, what happened in Wales. We had very few incidences of flooding compared to what happened with the Somerset levels and indeed the Thames, despite having the same weather pattern. So, yes, we can go so far in terms of legislation, but the money has to follow, particularly with regard to flood protection.
Antoine Sandbach.
Presiding Officer. First Minister, one of the issues that has arisen in front of the committee is about data, and particularly baseline data against which progress on biodiversity can be measured. Now, a lot of local records office hold that data, but it's not clear whether it's Natural Resources Wales or Welsh Government that is coordinating what will be a new data hub. Are you able to clarify whether or not it is Welsh Government or it's Natural Resources Wales, and will you tell us when that hub will be available? Because without that data, we can't in fact measure progress.
It is the Welsh Government Information Hub, and work is being undertaken at the moment in order to make sure that the hub is as robust as possible, and of course it fits in with the Nature Recovery Plan.
Griffiths.
Prif Weinidog, anewch chi gadarnhau ymrwymiad eich llywodraeth chi i Gymru i'n blaned ac i sicrhau fod Cymru yn byw oddi fewn i'w therfynau amgylcheddol, ac hefyd sut yma hynny yn cael ei adlewyrchu yn eich rhaglen llywodraethu?
Bydd hwn yn un nod wrth gwrs o'r bil cenedlaethau y dyfodol, ac wrth gwrs bydd aelodau yn edrych mlaen i weld cyhoeddiad y bil hynny cyn bo hir.
Question 6, Mick Anthony.
First Minister, what assessment have you made of the performance of the construction sector in Wales?
Well, the figures published in April show that the construction sector in Wales is outperforming the UK. The index of construction for Wales shows a 6.9% increase when comparing the latest 4 quarters to the previous 4 quarters, whilst the UK output increased by 1.1%.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. I very much welcome the increase, and of course 16% of the businesses in my constituency are actually construction businesses with many job opportunities and apprenticeships. One of the issues that concerns me, of course, is we want people to have those jobs and to be able to work safely. the Tory government has cut £80 million off the Health and Safety Executive, and proactive inspections of construction sites has fallen by 35%. Now, whereas health and safety may not be a devolved matter, the consequences of accidents at work really are. Will you consider making representations to ascertain precisely what is planned with regard to the quality of health and safety services within Wales, with a view to making a statement in the near future?
Yes, I mean, we don't know what's in the Queen's speech, but we know it's not going to be very, very long. But there may be something in it, we don't know, but we'll have to wait and see whether there are any proposals this week as well. But every year I proudly take part in Workers' Memorial Day. And every year there are people who are injured and killed at work. Now, the answer to that is not to weaken health and safety legislation to enable more people to be killed and injured at work. We have had a proud record over the years in the UK of making sure that people have a very good chance of coming home after they've been to work. Given that our industrial history, that is something we should very much prize. And any suggestion there should be any kind of deregulation or any kind of lack of inspection when it comes to health and safety can only lead to more people being injured, more people being killed, and that is something as a government we deplore.
Susie Davis.
First Minister, small construction firms who renew older properties remain at a disadvantage under Welsh Help to Buy, although the scheme is starting to help larger developers of new properties in my region. However, constituent correspondence suggests that some developers' sales divisions are either unclear about the relationship between the scheme, mortgage valuation and various purchase incentives, or are creative with that relationship. Can you outline how your government is monitoring the correct implementation of the scheme so that it can continue to support improvements in construction in Wales?
Well, I know that the Minister recently appointed a consultant to examine the issues around the potential for a system of regulation of domestic builders in Wales. In terms of Help to Buy, well, 105 developers have applied to register with the scheme. 66 of them are currently offering Help to Buy, and to date over 700 applications have been approved for Help to Buy. And that shows, of course, the scheme is working. It shows that there's general awareness of the scheme amongst developers, and it shows that there are first-time buyers who are now able to have a roof over their heads as a result of the action of the Welsh Government.
Jocelyn Davis.
Presiding Officer. First Minister, is it true that your government recently slashed the target for reducing CO2 emissions in building regulations from 40% to 8% and pushed back the deadline for meeting the EU target 5 years later than the rest of the UK? And will you tell us if sustainable development is still your central organising principle?
Well, it is, but so is ensuring that people have a roof over their heads, I have to say. And this announcement was made by the Minister last year, or indeed the year before that. It's certainly some time ago now, where we allowed the sector more time in order to meet the new set of building regulations. Given the situation with regard to the housing market, that was something that we wanted to do at the time, because there was a real danger that we ended up with fewer houses being built because of not giving enough time to developers to adapt to the new regulations. And I believe we've reached a very acceptable compromise that has not compromised our position with regard to sustainable development, but has allowed more houses to be built and more first-time buyers to have a home.
Peter Black.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, the figures produced by the Treasury at the end of May indicates that of these 7,300 homes sold under the Help to Buy mortgage guarantee scheme, which is the UK scheme, just about 5% were actually sold in Wales, and the majority of those in South East Wales. Given you've given figures on the Welsh scheme in terms of the 700 homes there, can you say how many of those homes were built outside of South East Wales, particularly to the west, where the areas where they need it most, and what is the government doing to try to encourage the use of these schemes to build new homes in areas outside of the South East of Wales and around the rest of the country?
I say to the member that around 20% have been built in the north of Wales. It's not the case that they're entirely in the southeast. With regard to the UK government scheme, 5% is a little more than our population share, actually, in terms of the scheme working there. And, of course, the two schemes dovetail with each other. But certainly, when I've travelled around Wales, I have seen houses being built all around Wales, not just around Cardiff and not just south of the M4. And it's quite clear that the two schemes, in fairness, are having an effect in order that doesn't lead to a housing bubble. I think there's a danger of that now in London and the southeast of England, but it's certainly having an effect in terms of enabling people to actually get a home.
George Watson.
Diolch Llawydd. First Minister, last week I did have the pleasure of hosting the official launch of the South West Wales Shared Apprenticeship Scheme, otherwise known as Cyflwynir. With the Welsh Government's support, in just a few years, the scheme has grown from a local training partnership with Carmarthenshire County Council to become the biggest employer of construction apprentices within the UK. Will the Welsh Government look to recreate this success in other Welsh regions?
Well, we have published a shared apprenticeship protocol to guide the development of shared apprenticeship schemes in Wales, and we are focusing on support within enterprise zones in order to aid economic growth and jobs. It does outline the need for private sector contributions, for sustainable jobs, and the targeted use of shared schemes to intervene only where we can clearly identify that there is a market failure. I can say that we are currently in discussion to assess the requirements of construction in the north of Wales. But of course it's important that we ensure that shared apprenticeship schemes always add value to the mainstream programmes rather than create unnecessary competition.
Question 7, David Ellis Thomas.
Mawr fan ys i glywed, gael ofyn y Prif Weinidog, pryd bydd o'n cael ei gyfarfod nesaf gyda Prif Weinidog ar Alban?
Ar yr awyren dydd Gwener ar y ffordd i Normandy fyddwn ni'n meddwl.
Wel, i ni'n llawenhau, wrth gwrs, y bydd y Prif Weinidog yn cynrychioli ni yn Normandy wrth cyflawni y ddyletswyddau. Ond dwi sicr y cael gyfle i drafod gyda Prif Weinidog ar Alban i syniad o sefydlu confensiwn cyfansoddiadol ar gyfer y Deyrnas Unedig i edrych ar ei dyfodol. A gai bwyso arno fo i geisio perswadio Prif Weinidog ar Alban y dylid sefydlu'r confensiwn yma beth bynnag fydd canlyniad y referendwm yn yr Alban, oherwydd mae'n amlwg i mi o edrych ar y pleidiau yn San Steffan i bod nhw'n cynnig popeth bron yma'r Alban eisiau cyn i referendwm ddigwydd.
Wel, sy'n ni'n codi'r mater o gonfensiwn cyfansoddiadol gyda Prif Weinidog ar Alban ar hyn o bryd, i ateb fi'n siŵr byddai, wel, annibyniaeth felly yw'r ateb i'r Alban. So felly, falle nid nawr i'r amser i godi hwn, ond ta beth yw'r ganlyniad ym mis Medi, bydd rhaid wrth gwrs i ystyried cyfansoddiad y Deyrnas Unedig mwyn sicrhau bod y cyfansoddiad yn fwy cadarn yn y dyfodol.
Andrew Archie Davis.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, when you do meet the First Minister of Scotland, obviously Scotland's hosting the Commonwealth Games in August, and I think it is the intention of the government to explore the possibility of a bid for Wales to host the Commonwealth Games sometime in the 2020s. Do you intend raising the matter about we can learn in the preparation of such a bid, and in particular, what interaction is there between government officials if a bid was to go forward, given that they would be the most immediate country to us that has recently hosted the Commonwealth Games?
I've already discussed the issue informally with him over the past few months. We will have officials examining very closely how the Commonwealth Games is taken forward in Scotland. It isn't cheap. It's an expensive project. I would caution members about that. To host the Commonwealth Games really needs to be done on the basis of it being a regeneration project, which is what has happened in Glasgow. Nevertheless, we will look to see how things have been done in Glasgow, and officials are doing that. It's something that I have discussed with officials on a regular basis anyway, and of course, once those games are over, we will assess once more the practicalities of a Welsh bid.
Question 8, Paul Davis.
Diolch Llywydd. A wnaeth y Prif Weinidog amlinellu polisïau Llywodraeth Cymru ar gyfer dyfodol gwasanaethau iechyd yn Sir Benfro?
Wel, mae'r ddogfen law yn llaw at iechyd yn amlinellu ein polisïau ar gyfer dyfodol gwasanaethau iechyd drwy Gymru yn gyfan gwbl. Edrych wrth gwrs i fwrdd iechyd Prifysgol Hywel Dda i ddarparu gwasanaethau diogel a chynaliadwy i bobl Sir Benfro a gwasanaethau wrth gwrs sy'n arwain at y canlyniadau gorau posibl.
Dwi'n ddiolchgar i'r Prif Weinidog am yr ateb yna. Dwi'n siŵr bydde fe yn cytuno â fi mwyn sicrhau gwasanaethau o safon uchel a phriodol i Sir Benfro. Mae rhaid sicrhau fod asesiadau cywir yn cymryd lle. Nawr, i chi fel Llywodraeth wedi penderfynu cael uned gofal arbennig i fybanod yn ysbyty Llwynhelig, mae'n debyg heb asesiadau o effaith ar gydraddoldeb oherwydd mae'r rhain ond wedi eu paratoi yn drafft gan y bwrdd iechyd. Yn yr amgylchiadau, gallwch chi ddweud wrthyn ni siwt mae'ch Llywodraeth chi wedi wneud y penderfyniad yma heb asesiadau llawn o effaith ar gydraddoldeb, ac ydych chi'n fodlon ail ystyried ac edrych ar y sefyllfa hyn i ystyried fod na ddim asesiadau llawn wedi ei baratoi?
Wel, dwi ddim yn derbyn hynny wrth gwrs, mae hwn yn fater sydd o lan y llysoedd ar hyn o bryd, so felly bach iawn allai weid amdano fe. Yn gael ddweud bod yn hymrwyniad ni tuag at ysbyty Llwynhelig yn glir. Mae 7.58 miliwn wedi cael ei fuddsoddi mwyn creu gorsfeidd orinal ar y safle yn Wyddi Bush. Ni wedi wrth gwrs datgan cyllid ynglyn â'r cronfa technoleg iechyd. Mae hwnna'n mynd i gael effaith yn ysbyty Llwyn Helyg ynglyn â scanners. Mae 4.7 miliwn o bunnoedd wedi cael ei roi i fwrdd iechyd hywel dda mwyn wrth gwrs i wella adnoddau gwyddoniaeth gwad yn Llwyn Helyg a hefyd yn ysbyty'r tywysog Philip, ac wrth gwrs ar ben hwnna, wrth gwrs mae yna 2.5 miliwn wedi cael ei roi mwyn i sicrhau adnewyddu yr adnoddau gwyddoniaeth gwad yn Llwyn Helyg i hunan, sydd yn rhan o'r ffigur hynny. So, ni wedi dangos yr ymrwymiad sydd gyda ni tuag at yr ysbyty, wrth gwrs mae rhaid i sicrhau bod gwasanaethau yn gynaliadwy ac yn saff.
Rebecca Evans.
Thank you. First Minister, how do you respond to concerns raised locally that the Wyddi Bush Midwife Service and A&E have been given reassurances about a future level of paediatric cover, which some practitioners feel is not borne out by the proposed paediatric model?
It's clear that there are differences of opinion amongst paediatricians over the service level that is being proposed. I'm aware there are several clinicians within Wyddi Bush who aren't happy with the proposals. There are other clinicians in the region who welcome the Health Board's proposed care models, and they're enthusiastic about the midwife-led unit at the hospital. Now, as I've said many times in the Chamber, on the basis of the advice that the Minister has received, amongst other factors, relevant factors, it's clear that there needs to be a change, and a change in order to ensure patient safety. And at the end of the day, this is what this is all about. And that change is supported by a significant number of clinicians.
Simon Thomas.
Diolch Llywydd. Ond, Prif Weinidog, mae'r gwasanaeth pediatric dydd yn nos yn fan anatod o gynnal y gwasanaeth bris ar yr adran daimwyniau yna. Pam nag yw Llywodraeth felly yn ymfwymo i gadw gwasanaeth pediatric dydd yn nos yn ysbyty Llwyn Helyg fel fan o maincnod cenedlaethol?
Wel, mae'n sicrhau bod beth bynnag sy'n cael ei wneud yn wneud mewn ffordd diogel. Does dim gobeith cael gwasanaeth lefel 2 yn Llwyn Helyg a Chyfyrddin. Un na'r llall yw yn y dewis. So felly, os da nigau Cyfyrddin bydde fe yn Llwyn Helyg wedi bod Cyfyrddin yn mynegu barn. Ond mae rhaid i'n sicrhau bod gyda ni uned i ddelio gyda nifer bach o fabis mwyn sicrhau bod nhw'n cael y triniaeth dilyn nhw gael mor gyntaf na sy'n bosib gan y bobl sydd ar arbenigedd i wneud hynny. Dyw ddim yn benderfyniad rwydd, ni gyd yn deall hwnna o fewn y Llywodraeth, ond mae'n rhywbeth sydd rhaid wneud mwyn sicrhau bod yna gwasanaeth ar gael i'r babis sydd eisiau'r gwasanaeth yna a chael y gwasanaeth yna yn cael ei roi iddyn nhw gan bobl sydd ar arbenigedd iawn i wneud hynny.
Joyce Watson.
Diolch Llywyd. First Minister, you may be aware that there have been concerns about staffing at Tenby Surgery. From the end of this month, there'll only be 3 GPs serving a 60,000 plus summer population. But the good news is that the Health Board are working with the practice and they're apparently on top of that. But can I ask you to discuss with the Minister for Health and Social Services the need for the Health Board to find long-term solutions to ensure patient access to health services in the Tenby area?
Yes, but in the interim I can say that locum cover has been identified and this will commence at the beginning of June. And a nurse practitioner has been employed until the end of August to support the GPs, and I know the Health Board is working with the practice to ensure that the service level continues in the future. So as far as the summer is concerned, and taking into account the proposals for the MIU, that is something that will be overcome, but of course there is a need, and the Health Board is doing this, to plan for the longer term now for service provision in the town.
Question 9, William Powell.
First Minister, will you please make a statement on the benefits of Wales remaining a member of the European Union?
It would be a disaster if we left. 150,000 jobs, £260 million to farmers. For any country that has a large manufacturing sector, leaving the EU would see many thousands of jobs leave Wales.
First Minister, I'm very grateful for that response. I think it's fair to say that the last couple of weeks haven't been particularly salutary for those of us across the continent who remain committed to the principles of the European Union, who want to ensure that Wales remains best placed to contribute to it, as well as deriving maximum benefit. And given our shared commitment to Europe's future, it seems to me particularly regrettable that the European Parliament has an office presence both in London and in Edinburgh, but doesn't currently have any such facility to support the work of Welsh MEPs. And I think Welsh MEPs across the parties over recent years have worked in a positive pro-Welsh, pro-European mindset. And in that context, First Minister, and given that disparity, what can the Welsh Government do to address this deficiency and to actually support a greater and more intelligent debate about the importance of the European Union, which you often advocate in this chamber and elsewhere, across the whole of Wales?
Well, the Commission, of course, has an office. Parliament doesn't. That is something I'm prepared to take up with the new MEPs. But I think it's worth emphasising the points that I made earlier about the importance of Wales's access to that large single market. It is within the first 3 questions I'm asked when I go abroad. How can we access the 500 million strong market of the EU? Anything that interferes with that is bad for Wales. It's bad for our farmers, it's bad for our manufacturers. That said, of course, there is a real need to reform the way in which the structure of the EU operates. My judgment is, others may share it, others may not, that in the European elections, many people see the European elections as a way of registering a vote because they don't believe it matters, because they don't know what the European Parliament does. And that is of regret, and there is a great deal of work, I think, that needs to be done on the part of the European Parliament, as well as the building on the good work of the Commission, to explain to people what the EU actually does. Time and time again, people say to me, well, you see, it's all to do with the European Court of Human Rights. That's nothing to do with the EU. That's as much to do with the EU as UEFA is. It just happens to share the European title. But it does show that there's an enormous amount of work to do in order for people to understand what the EU does.
William Graham.
With regard to your remarks then, First Minister, would you not then agree that the Conservative policy of having a vote on Europe is the way forward for those to express their view on either side, then the debate is finished and we go on with forward and trying to make things better in Wales?
Well, I think what you've done is have 3 years of utter uncertainty, because I can say to the member, I have spoken to companies who have been reluctant to come to Wales because of that referendum. It's the uncertainty. It's the uncertainty. They're saying, well, we don't know whether the UK will be in the EU or not, so how can we look at Wales as a place to invest because of that uncertainty? Same thing applies in Scotland. You can't on the one hand say the Scottish referendum is creating uncertainty, but the UK referendum on the EU isn't. Of course they are. 2 of them are causing uncertainty, and that is the nature of things. I don't know what the Prime Minister's position will be. He'll be Prime Minister in 2017, but I don't know what the position of the UK will be. I don't know what he sees as appropriate reform. Some of the things that I've seen mentioned by the coalition government would be bad for Wales. Any idea, for example, of transferring common agricultural policy payments to the UK government would mean that 260 million would either be skimmed or not be given to Wales at all. I'd rather the money come straight from Brussels, thanks, and see it skimmed in London. So that's not in Wales' interest at all for that to happen. Nor is it in Wales' interest at all for anything to be done that interferes with European structural funds via a filter that's in Whitehall. That is not something that is in Wales' best interest and something that I would resist to the greatest degree.
Roger Lynn Thomas.
Prif Weinidog, dwi'n gyda'n llwyr â chi byddai creu unrhyw ansicrwydd ar hyn o bryd yn gallu bod yn niweidiol iawn i economi Cymru ac yn gallu golygu bod cwmnïau yn anfodlon i fuddsoddi ac i leoli hynna'n yng Nghymru. Ond wrth gwrs, mae gan eich plaid chi hefyd bolisi o ail negodi y berthynas gyda Ewrop. Ond yn y darlun ehangach, chi wedi gwneud un glir iawn pa mor bwysig yw i Gymru fod o fewn Ewrop. Ond oes na le i ni chwilio am ffyrdd i sicrhau fod pobl Cymru yn deall hynny'n well. Oherwydd, dwi'n derbyn hyn o'ch chi'n gweud am yr etholiad arbennig yma, ond wedi dweud hynny, mae'n amlwg nad ydy'r neges honno ddim wedi cyrraedd pobl Cymru pa mor bwysig yw i ni fod yng nghanol Ewrop.
Mae hynny'n hollol iawn, a mae yna ddyletswydd yno pob un ni yn y pleidiau i gyd mwyn sicrhau bobl yn deall beth sydd yn digwydd ar y lefel Ewropeaidd. Ond mae yna ddyletswydd ar yr Undeb Ewropeaidd hefyd i esbonio beth mae'n wneud. Ag i ystyried bod y dueddiad tuag at integreiddio yn fwy, mwyn wedi lleihau lot wrth edrych ar beth sydd wedi digwydd dros Ewrop yn gyfan gwbl. Beth sy'n ironi, wrth gwrs, yw bod y Deyrnas Unedig wedi dilyn trend Ewropeaidd ynglyn â phleidleisio mewn niferoedd i blaid sydd yn wrth Ewropeaidd. Mae'n digwydd nid dim ond yn y Deyrnas Unedig, digwyddodd yn yr Iwerddon, o'n i'n wrthos diwetha, Sinn Féin. Nawr, y blaid mwyaf nid dim ond ar gyngor Belfast yn cyngor dilyn, bydd yn bod yn anhygoel i Gymru yn ôl. A hefyd beth ddigwyddodd yn Ffrainc, beth ddigwyddodd yn Hwngari, beth ddigwyddodd yn Groeg, oedd na drend yn rhan fwyaf o wledydd Ewrop. Mae rhaid i'r Undeb Ewropeaidd a hefyd y Comisiwn i ystyried mwyn sicrhau bod nhw'n cael cefnogaeth pobl Ewrop unwaith to.
Thank you, First Minister. We now move to item